I'm going to tell you something about electricity that most people who drive electric vehicles know, but that some people who are new to them have not yet fully processed. Electricity is not casual. Electricity does not negotiate. Electricity does not care about your entitlement or your social standing or the fact that you paid $87,000 for your car and believe that number entitles you to certain considerations that the laws of physics are not prepared to extend. Electricity follows rules that were established long before you arrived and will be in force long after you leave. And the most important of those rules is that the wrong connector going into the wrong port at the wrong voltage is not a minor inconvenience that can be walked back. It is a conversation between your electrical system and your car's battery management system that, when conducted in the wrong language at the wrong volume, produces consequences that are expensive, irreversible, and entirely your own fault. My name is Joel Castillo. I am 46 years old. I am an electrical engineer. I have been an electrical engineer for 22 years, specializing in power systems and charging infrastructure, which is a specialty that became considerably more relevant to residential life when electric vehicles went from a curiosity to a mainstream product over the past decade. I drive a Tesla Model 3. I have driven Teslas for 6 years. I installed a Tesla wall connector, the Level 2 home charging unit, in my garage 4 years ago, and the installation is permitted, inspected, and wired to its own dedicated 48-amp circuit with a breaker panel that I sized and installed myself under a homeowner pull permit because I am an electrical engineer, and pulling my own permit for my own home's electrical work is something I am qualified to do and had done once before for a hot tub installation. The charger works perfectly. It charges at 44 miles of range per hour, which is everything I need for daily use and more. I live in Pemberton Run, which is a 56-home HOA development in Larimer County, Colorado. I have lived here for 6 years, which is also how long I have had the Tesla. I bought the car and the house in the same month, which was the kind of simultaneous life reorganization that happens when things align in a particular way. Pemberton Run is a well-managed development, generally speaking. The HOA board has been stable and reasonable for the time I have been here. The neighbors are a mix of young families, remote workers, and outdoor enthusiasts of the Colorado variety, and the general atmosphere is pleasant without being relentlessly communal. I know most of my neighbors. I like most of the ones I know. We have, for 6 years, lived in the easy parallel of people who share a neighborhood without requiring much from each other. Deborah Fitch moved in 3 years ago. She bought a house 4 doors down on the same side of the street, and she arrived driving a white Lexus UX 300e, which is Lexus's compact electric crossover, a well-made car, comfortable and refined, with a charging system based on the CH-ADEMO and Type 2 standard rather than the Tesla proprietary connector system. This distinction is not trivial. It is, in fact, the entire foundation of what happened, and I want to make sure anyone reading this understands it clearly before we get to the events. Tesla uses its own charging connector standard. In North America, the North American Charging Standard, or NACS, which Tesla developed and which has been adopted by several other manufacturers, but which at the time of the events I am describing was not in universal use. The Lexus UX 300e uses the Combined Charging System, or CCS, connector, a different physical standard with different pin configurations. A Tesla wall connector does not accept a CCS plug, not because of software restriction, because the physical plugs are different shapes. You cannot plug a CCS connector into a Tesla wall connector any more than you can plug a European electrical plug into a standard American outlet. The shapes are incompatible. The attempt to force them produces either nothing, the connector simply does not fit, or, if someone has obtained an adapter of questionable provenance and applied it incorrectly under the wrong circumstances, something considerably worse than nothing. I also want to note, for completeness, that even if the connectors were compatible, my Tesla wall connector is paired to my Tesla account and operates on my home's dedicated circuit, and that allowing someone else to use it would mean adding their consumption to my electricity bill, using a circuit that is sized for my charging patterns, and accepting liability for whatever happened during their charging session. These are not considerations I had spent much time on before Deborah Fitch, because no one had ever asked me to share my home EV charger before. It had not occurred to me that this was a thing someone would ask. Deborah introduced herself about 2 weeks after she moved in the way of new neighbors who are organized and social and want to establish themselves in the neighborhood quickly. She was pleasant in that introduction. She asked about the neighborhood, mentioned she had noticed the Tesla in my driveway, said she had just gotten an electric car herself and was still figuring out the charging situation. She mentioned that the nearest public fast charger was about 4 miles away, which she found inconvenient for daily use. I said I understood that and recommended she install a home charger, which was the obvious solution, and mentioned that the HOA's architectural guidelines permitted EV charger installation on residential garages and that several neighbors had done it. She said she was looking into it. We parted on pleasant terms. She came back 3 weeks later. She knocked on my door on a Saturday afternoon and said she had done some research and that installing a level 2 charger was going to cost her between $800 and $1,200 for equipment and installation, and she was wondering if there was a way we could work something out in the interim. Specifically, whether she could use my charger in the evenings when I was presumably not using it. She said she would be happy to contribute to my electricity bill. I want to describe what I felt in that moment because it is relevant to what followed. I did not immediately refuse. I considered it for a moment as the actual engineering proposition it was, and then I walked through the actual engineering considerations, which are: my charger is a Tesla wall connector, designed and certified for use with Tesla vehicles. The Lexus UX300e uses a CCS connector. The physical standards are incompatible. There is no adapter that enables safe, standards-compliant charging of a non-Tesla CCS vehicle at a Tesla wall connector. I said to Deborah, I appreciate you asking, but there are a couple of issues. My charger is a Tesla wall connector, which uses Tesla's proprietary connector standard. Your Lexus uses CCS. The connectors are physically different and the charging protocols are different. You cannot safely charge your car at my charger. She said, are you sure? I thought EV chargers were all the same. I said I was an electrical engineer who specialized in charging infrastructure, and I was certain. I said the solution was installing a CCS-compatible Level 2 charger in her own garage, and I offered to recommend a local installer who did good work at competitive prices. She said she would think about it. She did not call the installer I recommended. She came back 4 weeks after that with a variation on the original request. She told me, read about adapters that allowed non-Tesla EVs to use Tesla charging infrastructure, and she had found one online. She had it with her, a small device purchased from a third-party seller on an online marketplace, which she showed me. I looked at it. It was a third-party adapter claiming to enable CCS to NACS compatibility from a manufacturer I did not recognize, without any certification markings I could identify as indicating safety testing compliance. I said, Deborah, I cannot allow this to be used at my charger. This adapter is not certified by any recognized safety testing organization that I can identify. Using an uncertified adapter at my charger creates a risk of damage to both my charging equipment and your vehicle, and it creates a liability situation for me if something goes wrong. She said, but adapters like this are available everywhere. Other people use them. I said adapter availability did not constitute certification, and that the existence of a product on the market did not mean it was safe or appropriate for any particular use. I said I was sorry, but the answer was no. She left without the pleasant manner she had arrived with. What happened over the following 3 weeks was the escalation of a request into something else. Deborah spoke to 2 of our mutual neighbors and characterized my refusals as unreasonable and anti-community, and this came back to me through the neighborhood social network that exists in any small residential community. She also sent a message through the HOA's resident communication platform, a group messaging system the board ran for neighborhood announcements, asking whether any residents with EV chargers would be willing to share access with neighbors who did not yet have their own installation. She addressed the message to the community generally, but I was aware, and I believe most readers of the message were aware, that it was directed at a specific situation. I read that message and I wrote a response. I said that EV charger sharing in residential settings involved significant practical and safety considerations, including charger type compatibility, circuit capacity, liability, and equipment certification, and that residents considering sharing arrangements should consult with a qualified electrician about these issues before making agreements. I said this as a community information contribution rather than as a response to Deborah specifically, because I did not think publicly naming the specifics of our exchange was appropriate. Deborah sent me a direct message through the HOA platform the next day. She said she felt I was being deliberately obstructionist and that my refusal to allow her to charge her car at my charger was inconsiderate given that she lived in the same community. She said she understood the connector issue but had found a solution, a different adapter, one that she said had better reviews, and was asking me to reconsider. I said I would look at the adapter if she wanted to show it to me, but that my position on unrecertified third-party adapters had not changed, and that I would need to see certification documentation before I could agree. She showed me the new adapter. It had a brand name I also did not recognize and claimed to be CE marked, which is a European self-certification standard. CE marking does not constitute UL or ETL certification for the North American market and does not indicate testing to North American electrical standards. I said I could not approve this adapter for use at my charger. She said I was being ridiculous. I said I was being careful with my electrical installation and my home, and that careful and ridiculous were not the same thing. She said, "Fine, I'll figure it out myself." I did not know exactly what that meant when she said it. I found out on a Tuesday evening 3 weeks later. I had been at work late, I was in the middle of a project deliverable, and I got home at about 7:30, which was later than my usual time. I pulled into my driveway and noticed immediately that my garage door was not fully closed. It was down to about a foot off the ground, which is not a position my garage door stops in normally. It stops all the way up or all the way down. A foot off the ground meant it had been interrupted mid-cycle. I sat in my car in the driveway for a moment and then got out and went to the garage side door, unlocked it, and went in. My Tesla wall connector was on the floor. Not damaged, not obviously damaged, not burned or melted, but disconnected from the wall mount and lying on the garage floor, which was not where I had put it when I installed it 4 years ago and where it had remained through 4 years of daily use. The charging cable was coiled beside it. The mounting bracket was still on the wall with 2 of the 4 mounting screws still seated. The other 2 screws were on the floor near the unit. The cable that ran from the back of the wall connector to the conduit in the wall was still connected. It had not been pulled hard enough to disconnect from the wiring, but the unit had been unmounted. I stood in my garage for what I estimate was about 2 minutes, looking at the wall connector on the floor before I did anything else. Then I took out my phone and took photographs. Then I checked the garage for anything else that appeared disturbed. Nothing else had been touched. My tools were where they were. The storage shelves were undisturbed. The car keys I kept on a hook near the interior door were where they belonged. Then I went to the front of the garage and looked at the partial opening in the garage door, which was the foot-high gap that had first caught my attention. From the front of the garage, I could see that a small wooden wedge, not something I owned, had been placed under the door at the bottom, which was preventing the auto-close sensor from completing the door's cycle. Someone had wedged my garage door open. I called the Larimer County Sheriff's Department. HOA Karen demanded free use of my Tesla charger, then fried her own Lexus trying to plug it in. The deputy who responded was a woman named Officer Paula Reed, who had the patient, methodical manner of someone who had been taking reports on residential incidents long enough to know that the details that seem minor usually turn out to matter. She listened to my description, photographed everything I had photographed, and several things I had not thought to photograph, bagged the wooden wedge as evidence, and examined the Tesla wall connector on the floor with appropriate care. She asked me whether the unit had been damaged. I said I needed to inspect it properly before I could answer, and I did. I put on my insulated gloves, examined the unit and the wiring connection, and determined that the unit itself had not been damaged in the unmounting process. though the mounting bracket had been bent and 2 screws had stripped in the mounting holes. She asked how someone would have accessed my garage. I said through the garage door, given that the wedge had been placed to keep it partially open. She asked if I had a camera system. I said I had a doorbell camera at the front of the house, and a camera I had installed in the garage itself after the neighborhood had a tool theft issue 2 years prior. The garage camera had footage. I pulled it on my phone while Officer Reed was still there. The footage showed, at 6:22 that evening, more than an hour before I arrived home, my garage door rising to its full open position, which told me someone had used the keypad code on the exterior of the door. I watched the footage with Officer Reed. A figure entered the garage carrying what appeared to be a small device or adapter. The figure went directly to the Tesla wall connector on the wall, without looking around the garage, without hesitation, as someone who had looked at the charger before and knew where it was. The figure attempted to connect something to the wall connector. After approximately 4 minutes of what the footage showed as effort and apparent difficulty, the figure unmounted the unit from the wall. This took about 3 minutes of visible effort, and appeared to attempt a connection with the unit off the wall. This also did not produce whatever the figure was expecting. After approximately 7 minutes of total time in the garage, the figure placed the wall connector on the floor, placed the wedge under the partially closing door. The door had begun its auto-close cycle and left. The camera resolution was sufficient to clearly identify Deborah Fitch. Officer Reed watched the footage twice. She said, "Mr. Castillo, do you know this person?" I said yes. I gave her Deborah's name and address. Officer Reed said she would go speak with Deborah and that I should not approach her or her property in the meantime. I said I understood. Officer Reed left. I remounted the wall connector while I waited. The unit was undamaged. Deborah's attempt to connect her adapter had not succeeded in making any electrical connection because, as I have explained, the connectors are physically different shapes and no amount of force or adapter manipulation was going to change that. The mounting bracket required replacement, which I addressed the following weekend. The wiring was intact. By 9 o'clock that evening my charger was back in service, properly mounted, confirmed operational by a test charge on my own vehicle. Officer Reed called me at 8:47 that evening. She said she had spoken with Deborah and that the conversation had been, in her characterization, informative. She said Deborah had confirmed that she had entered my garage and had attempted to connect her car's charging adapter to my Tesla wall connector. She said Deborah had characterized her entry as a misunderstanding. She had known the code to my garage door from a conversation at a neighborhood gathering where I had mentioned the code for package delivery purposes, which was accurate, though mentioning it for that purpose was clearly not the authorization Deborah had used it for. She said Deborah had said she had not thought of it as unauthorized because she felt I had been unfairly refusing a reasonable request, and she was just trying to solve her own problem. Officer Reed delivered this characterization with the specific neutral tone of someone who has heard an explanation and has assessed it, and is not sharing the assessment because it is not her role to share it at this stage of the proceedings. She said the report was being written up and that the matter would be reviewed by the county attorney's office for potential criminal charging. I said I understood and thanked her. Then I sat in my kitchen and thought about what had happened. The next morning I called an attorney named Daniel Kim, who had handled my house purchase and a contract matter for me 2 years earlier, and who had referred me previously to specialists when he did not handle something himself. I described the situation. Daniel said this was a criminal trespass and potentially a burglary charge, depending on how the county attorney read the intent, and that civilly I had a trespass claim and potentially a property damage claim for the mounting bracket damage. He said the more interesting question was what had happened with Deborah's car, which I had not yet told him about. I said I did not know what had happened with Deborah's car. He said, "Joel, she was in your garage trying to plug an incompatible adapter into your Tesla charger. Do you know if she succeeded in making any kind of connection?" I said based on my inspection of the unit, she had not made any connection at my charger. He said, "Do you know what happened to her car?" I said I had not checked. I did not need to check. I found out from my neighbor across the street, a retired contractor named Paul Strom, who came over the following morning while I was in the driveway and said, "Joel, did you hear about Deborah's Lexus?" I said I had not. He said that the previous evening, the same evening Deborah had been in my garage, her Lexus had been towed from her driveway. Paul, who was observant about the street, with the particular attention of someone who is home during the day and has good sight lines, said he had seen a flatbed truck take the car shortly after 8 in the evening. He said the car had appeared to have some kind of electrical issue. Deborah had been on the phone outside when the tow truck came and had been animated in the conversation. I thought about this. I said, "Paul, do you know if she was trying to charge the car before it was towed?" He said he did not know the sequence of events. I said I appreciated the information and went inside. What had happened to the Lexus, I reconstructed over the following weeks from several sources, from Daniel Kim's investigation through the civil case, from information that came through the HOA board's incident review, and from a conversation that Deborah's own insurance company had with my insurer in connection with the incident. Here is what the evidence indicated. After leaving my garage, Deborah had returned to her own home and had attempted to use the third-party adapter, the CE-marked one she had shown me, to charge her Lexus from a standard 120-volt household outlet, which is the level 1 charging method that all EVs support through their included portable charge cord. She had used the third-party adapter in combination with her existing charge cord in an attempt to increase the charging rate, which is not how any of these systems work, and was an attempt based on a fundamental misunderstanding of how EV charging protocols function. The adapter had bridged connections in her vehicle's onboard charging system in a way that the Lexus's battery management system had not been designed to handle, which had triggered a fault condition, which had caused the onboard charger module to disable itself as a protective measure, which had then generated a fault code that locked the vehicle's charge system in a protected shutdown state. The Lexus was not on fire. The Lexus was not physically damaged in the sense of visible destruction, but its onboard charging system was in a fault state that required a dealership diagnostic to clear, and the clearing process revealed that the onboard charger module itself had sustained damage that required replacement. The replacement of a Lexus UX300E onboard charger module is not a minor service item. The labor alone is significant. The part is a dealership-supplied component. The total repair cost, which I learned through the insurance communication, was approximately $14,000. Deborah's insurance company initially attempted to characterize the damage as a manufacturing defect. The Lexus dealership's diagnostic report, however, clearly indicated that the fault had been introduced by an external device applied to the charging port in a non-standard configuration. The insurance company then attempted to characterize it as an accident. The police report, which had been filed the same evening and which referenced the third-party adapter Deborah had been using, connected the adapter to the vehicle damage in a way that made the accident characterization difficult to sustain. Ultimately, Deborah's insurance company denied the claim on the grounds that the damage had been caused by the use of a non-certified third-party device, which was specifically excluded from the coverage terms. $14,000 out of pocket, in addition to whatever consequences followed from the criminal referral. Daniel Kim filed a civil complaint on my behalf against Deborah for the trespass and the mounting bracket damage. The mounting bracket was not expensive. The replacement part and my own labor to install it cost me approximately $90. But the trespass claim had value beyond the physical damage because it established the legal record of unauthorized entry and what happened there, and because trespass damages in Colorado can include attorney fees when the trespass is willful, which Deborah's garage camera footage established comprehensively. The complaint sought $90 in property damage, attorney fees, and a restraining order preventing Deborah from entering my property or accessing my garage door code. The county attorney's office filed a criminal trespass charge. In Colorado, criminal trespass of a dwelling or structure is a Class 5 felony when the entry is knowing and unauthorized. Deborah's entry into my garage, knowing she did not have authorization, was the statutory definition of this offense. Her attorney negotiated the charge down to a misdemeanor criminal trespass through a plea agreement that required community service, payment of restitution for my bracket damage, and a deferred judgment that would be dismissed after 12 months of compliance. She also agreed to the restraining order in connection with the civil case, which meant my garage door code was officially off-limits to her regardless of how she had obtained it. The HOA board held a special session to discuss the incident. I attended. The board president, a man named Alan Foss, who had been in the position for 3 years and who ran a sensibly managed meeting, said the board had reviewed the situation and wanted to discuss whether any HOA policies should be updated in response. I said I would be happy to discuss that. I gave the board a brief technical summary of EV charging standards, connector compatibility, and the liability and safety considerations involved in charger sharing, which took about 15 minutes and which I had prepared as a clean one-page summary because 15 years of giving technical presentations had taught me that engineers who do not simplify for non-technical audiences are their own worst enemies. The board listened carefully. At the end, Alan said, "Joel, is there any scenario in which a resident sharing their private home EV charger with another resident is safe and appropriate?" I said yes. If both vehicles use the same connector standard, if the sharing residence circuit has been sized for the additional demand, if the parties have a clear agreement about cost sharing and liability, and if the equipment involved is properly certified. He said, so it's not inherently impossible, but it has to be done correctly. I said that was correct. He said he would have the board's council draft language for the community guidelines addressing EV charger sharing, informed by the technical considerations I had described. The guidelines language was adopted the following month. It described the compatibility requirements, the circuit considerations, and the liability framework in plain terms, and it explicitly prohibited the use of uncertified third-party adapters on any shared or private EV charging installation in the development. It also established that residents' private EV chargers were private property and that access to them required the owner's explicit permission. I reviewed the draft and provided technical comments. The final language was clear and accurate. Deborah Fitch completed her community service, paid her restitution, and stayed within the terms of the deferred judgment through the 12-month period. She also finally had a CCS-compatible Level 2 charger installed in her own garage. I could see the outlet cover on her garage exterior when I drove past. I do not know whether the Lexus was ever repaired or whether she replaced it. I know that the white Lexus was not in her driveway for several months, and then a different car appeared, a silver one, also an EV of some kind, that was there when I drove past. I did not ask which car it was or what happened to the Lexus because it was not my business. My Tesla wall connector is remounted on its bracket, on its circuit, in my garage, where it has been for 4 years, with the addition of 2 things it did not have before: a new hasp lock on the garage side door and a new code on the garage door keypad that I changed within 24 hours of the incident and have not shared with anyone since. The garage camera now covers the full interior, upgraded to a higher resolution unit that I installed the weekend after everything happened. My car charges every night at the scheduled time. The wall connector runs at the voltage and amperage it was designed to run at, within the circuit it was designed for, using the connector it was designed for, with the vehicle it was designed for. Everything is exactly right, in the way that things are exactly right when they are installed correctly by someone who understands what they are installing and why it matters. Paul Strom asked me, a few months after everything settled, whether I wished I had just let Deborah use the charger in the beginning. I said no, because the charger she had could not use my charger's connector safely, and the outcome of allowing an uncertified adapter at my installation was never going to be what she wanted it to be. He said, "What do you think she was expecting?" I said I thought she was expecting that electricity would cooperate with her expectations the way she expected most things to cooperate with her expectations. He said, "And it didn't." I said, "Electricity never does." He said, "Well, she knows now." I said, "Yes, that was not in question. The charging cable is coiled on the bracket where it lives. The indicator light on the wall connector is green, which is the color it shows when the system is ready and everything is correct, and the circuit is whole, and the connection is waiting for the vehicle it was designed for, which is the vehicle in my garage, which belongs to me, which charges here every night without incident and without drama and without anyone's intervention, except the scheduled automation that handles it while I am already inside and asleep. Green means ready. Green means correct. Green means exactly what it is supposed to mean, and nothing more and nothing less than that. Thumbnail text, asterisk. She wanted my charger. Her car paid the voltage.